Greetings and salutations, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at the First World War and the role that the United States played in it. This was the war that was supposed to be the Great War, the war to end all war, the war to make the world safe for democracy again. And boy howdy, did it not do any of those things. But without further ado, let's get started. The president at the time the war began was this man, Woodrow Wilson. He was a Democrat. He is referred to as the progressive president because more than his predecessors, Taft and Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, we see he applied for social changes to the populace in the progressive manner. He had been a governor, he had been a professor at Princeton, he was a comparative political scientist, and he believed that morality could shape foreign policy. He was extremely religious and believed that peace, world peace, was within our lifetime. It was going to happen very, very soon. Wilson believed that American influence in the world should be a moral crusade. He wanted to help create the New World Order, the idea that fair play and cooperation could bring all people collectively together. He believes that democracy is the best kind of government and pledged that the United States wasn't going to try to conquer anymore. The goals of the Spanish-American War, the expansions across the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Guam, even for some, the Panama Canal building was an imperialistic goal. He said, all that is done, we are not an empire anymore. And from this point on, the United States was going to be neutral. We are not going to get involved in someone else's war. We're not going to get involved in someone else's fight. And when the war started, that's what he maintained we were going to do. We're not getting involved. He said that consistently when things started heating up, and then when the war broke out in Europe, he said, this isn't our fight. We're not getting involved. He told people that our hearts and minds should be neutral in every way. But at the same time, he himself didn't want to see England lose. And aside from, not wanting to see our ally lose, the American industries, we were making money selling stuff during the war. And this is definitely in contrast to the neutrality idea that Wilson puts forward. He says, don't get involved, let's all stay neutral, while at the same time, lots of money is made selling stuff. So there's definitely some contradictions going on here. These propaganda posters were the idea that the United States needed to get involved and that we should be engaged in this. When we look at how much money we're talking about when we talk trade, that's the information that's up here. Our trade with Germany, and remember they were the ones who were fighting the British and the French, so they're labeled as the bad guys. But this is World War I. It's not about Nazis, it's more about nationalism. In 1914, which is the year the war begins, we were trading about $170 million every year with Germany. 2 years later, not a thing at all. And that continued to go down. While our trade with the Allies, the ones who win, the quote-unquote good guys, when the war starts in 1914, collectively, and this is England and France and Russia and sometimes Italy, was the other side of $800 million. 2 years into the war, $3.2 billion. And again, you can see this continued to go up. In May of 1915, the Germans had been practicing a policy called unrestricted submarine warfare. This meant if you were a German sub and you see an enemy ship in the water, it didn't matter if it's a warship, a merchant ship, a cruise ship, it's an enemy ship, it's in front of you, you're going to sink it. See, subs at this time were pretty much undetectable. There's no radar, no sonar, and if you're underwater, the only way that other ship knows you're there is if you crash into them or somebody sticks their head underwater and it's clear enough that they can even see you. So functionally, you're invisible. In May of 1915, the German unrestricted submarine warfare tactic led them to sink this cruise liner, the Lusitania. 1,100 people were on board and a couple hundred Americans too. From this point onward, we are really not willing to see unrestricted sub warfare, and we're really, really upset with the Germans. Wilson demands that Germany apologize. He demands that Germany make reparations, make payments to the rest of the families that were killed, and says that they should stop attacking like this. And Germany says, you're right, that was bad, we should never have done that. And they stop the unrestricted submarine warfare for a while. We're talking a matter of months. This was not a long point of time thing. And we're still going to trade with them. We're still trading with the Allies and with Germany because they're still buying our stuff. And that might seem a little confusing, but remember, money can make people do crazy things. In 1916, Wilson runs for election again. And his first term, he had gone out of his way to remember how he kept us out of the war, remember how he kept us from fighting in that war. You should put me back in the White House. You should keep me there. And we should also prepare for war. He plays both sides of the war game. To the public, he makes it known that he doesn't want the idea of war, but at the same time, it wouldn't be bad for us to start prepping for war. Surprisingly, this double talk, it worked. It was really close. When you look at the electoral votes, you need 270 to win, and Wilson gets 277. And even by the popular votes, he only wins by 500,000 votes. Over time, propaganda continues to grow, and we continue to see that the public wants to see something done about this war. They believe that this war has gone on and the Germans are a terrible threat to everyone and everything, and without them being stopped, chaos would ensue. Oh, so scary. January 1917, we have our real motivator for going to war, the Zimmermann telegram. This was a telegram that was sent from Germany to Mexico, intercepted by the British, and then relayed to us. We didn't even catch wind of this thing. And the telegram says, it essentially, and I am paraphrasing, Dear Mexico, hi there, how's it going? It's your best friend, Germany. The United States had been having a proxy war with Mexico for a while. You see, Mexico is going through a political revolution, and we see that every now and then some of the people fighting the revolution cross the border and scuffle happens on this side. We had been more concerned with what was going on there than we were with Germany. So this letter from Germany to Mexico says, hey, Mexico, if you keep the United States engaged, if you keep the United States from getting involved in our war, maybe you ramp up your border skirmishes, then when we win, Germany will come to your aid and make sure you get all the land you've lost to the United States, Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. Now, when this arrived on the desk of the president, this was shocking to everyone in the room because we had no idea that this was something that the Germans would stoop to. And then the telegram was leaked anonymously to the public. And when that happens, people who didn't care one way or another about the war now view, oh, we have to go to war. We have to fight these Germans. This just cannot stand. That's a copy of the untranslated, encoded telegram. That's the real telegram. If you want to pause it here and read it, you can, but what I've said is the good gist of it. There's a U-boat. When I say these things are a real threat, you can see, those are big ships. But they really weren't using the U-boats. By they, I mean the Germans weren't using the U-boats to cross the Atlantic. They were really just harassing the British and the English Channel. If you get close to Europe, that's where you're going to have to worry about it. We've already discussed unrestricted submarine warfare, the idea that a German sub could fire at any target in front of it, and the Germans didn't view that as a problem. When it came to time for us to get involved in the war, Wilson is very pro-British. He views this not just as a threat against us, a threat in Europe, this is also a threat for democracy itself. And very quickly, more and more are supporting this idea. Big banking firms are, industrialists are going to, and these groups are going to do so because war is good for business. When Wilson asks for that declaration of war, he gets it in April of 1917. The Senate votes overwhelmingly, the House as well, and on April 16, 1917, the United States has officially gone to war with Germany and their allies. To pay for the war, it required a lot of different things. War is very expensive, so some things that happened was, first off, income taxes go up. Corporations have to pay more taxes. Loans from individual banking institutes are taken out. And the public was encouraged to purchase war bonds. The idea of a war bond, and nowadays we call them treasury notes, is that you pay for a portion of the war, and when the war is over and X number of years have passed, you can cash in your bond for extra money. We knew the war was going to cost around $24 billion, and 11 of those billion were given out by individual loans from different banking institutions. To make sure there was enough stuff at home, the war boards were created, and this was a giant bureaucratic organization that managed food, meat, sugar, wheat, the railroads, gasoline, merchant ships, you name it. These guys were responsible for making sure that soldiers in the field had enough and there wasn't too much of a lack of supplies back home. During this conflict, we do see that certain civil liberties were suspended, and this isn't the first time that freedoms had disappeared. When John Adams, who was our second president, was in office, he passed the Alien Sedition Act that said you could not say anything bad about the federal government or the president. That was ultimately trumped because it was a gross violation of the First Amendment. When the Civil War was going on, Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, so if you were a prisoner of war, you might not see a court. During the First War, Wilson passed Sedition Acts, which limited free speech. And then the Espionage and Sedition Act had real harsh punishments for individuals who were actively trying to betray or sabotage the United States or the war front. Specifically, the Espionage Act gave big fines and prisons if you were trying to obstruct the war. The Sedition Act gave you, again, prison and a big fine if you tried to rise up against the state. To get people to fight, that was one of our biggest hurdles because the United States Army at this time, the entire armed forces at this time numbered under 40,000 soldiers. And all at once we needed that number to increase by a factor of like 12. So the Selective Service Act was put into place. This is the draft. All men from 18 to 45 were ordered to register. If you are drafted, first off, you are going to be unmarried. You are going to have to be someone who is not in a critical position, a significant job you have. You also may be overlooked for the draft if you are in school, if you're in a college or Medfield or lawyer or something like that. 24 million people register for the draft in 1917 because it's the law and there's a big fine and penalty if you don't. 2.8 million people are drafted, and then another 2 million people are going to volunteer to give us a standing army that worked very well. The American fighting force was called the American Expeditionary Force, and the nickname that our guys had in the field was we were the Doughboys, because unlike the British, unlike the French, unlike the Germans, who had been fighting in this war for the past 3 years and kind of struggling to stay alive for the past 3 years, we hadn't. They had been going without food, going without resources, and we were fortunate to have lots of those things. Remember, it's not just that the United States is at war. It's the United States and all their resources are at war. By 1916, Russia leaves the war. And for Germany, this was great because they had been dividing their fighting force between equally fighting the French and fighting the Russians. So with Russia out of the war, Germany can turn their full attention towards the French and the British. The same year that Russia leaves, there's a big mutiny for the French, and a couple hundred people are executed by the French because they refused to fight. The tactic that we see used in World War I is called trench warfare. It's where both sides are sitting in these great big trenches. Neither side is moving forward. You would get out of your trench, run across no man's land, the area between the two trenches, to try to kill everyone in that trench. But, you know, the person in that other trench, it's kind of hard. They're very well defended, so they can just wait for you to come. And both sides are doing this. They're waiting in the trenches. New weapons like machine guns, new weapons like poison gas, flamethrowers are going to really make this a devastating war. There's some pictures of trench warfare, and this isn't just like a guy who digs a hole in the ground. These are really rather complicated defensive barriers. That picture on the right is chemical warfare. That is a gas attack that is going on. And this was a very useful, very dangerous type of warfare, partially because one lungful of that gas could be enough to kill you, and the other part is if the wind changes, then that gas is coming your way, and well, there's going to be a lot of dead people no matter what. We see machine guns utilized during this time. They were not meant to be carried into war. This was a defensive position that was created. These machine guns weighed about 200 to 300 pounds, so you're not carrying this thing anywhere. They were great if you could set them up in a series of nests because they're not moving anywhere. When the enemy tries to take your trench line, you just spray at the horizon and you will be in a safe place. You know, except you're still at war, so safe is relative. Tanks. The tank really makes its debut in this war. Now, the picture on the top left looks like a Mark I, and the picture on the top right is a Mark II. These tanks are not known for their speed. They can top out anywhere from 6 to 8 miles an hour. They don't have the big turret that we now see. What they do have is they're pretty much unstoppable. That 6 to 8 miles an hour, it's going to keep coming. It's bulletproof, unless it's a direct hit, bomb-proof. It's going to go over the trenches. It's going to go across no man's land, and it's going to be the way you can win and mobilize across the battlefield, just so long as, you know, it doesn't get stuck in the mud or something. Artillery cannons, big ones. These are designed to lob a artillery shell towards an enemy position. They were not accurate. They're a lot like modern day artillery, only even less accurate. Now, the chance of one of these things hitting right where you want it to is pretty small. That's why both sides are going to deploy these weapons in the thousands, and in some cases tens of thousands of cannons firing. Some of the other technology we got some gas masks for everyone and everything. The more we see with tech in the war, the more we see more dead. The airplane, the Zeppelin, the tank, the poison gas, the machine guns, the flamethrowers, they didn't win the war overnight. And they left a lot of corpses in their way when it was all said and done. For women in the war, they were responsible more for behind the scenes stuff. Men went to go fight, women went to work. The United States did not put female soldiers in the front lines. We might see some auxiliary work. We'd see secretaries and nurses. We would see women who would make guns and bombs. But as far as active soldiers, did not see that yet. The war comes to a conclusion in November 11th, 1918. Germany surrendered because for them it looked like the whole war was about to be over and they were about to lose big time. The war ended with this armistice. The United States came in right at the end, was successful in turning the tide of the war, and even helped shape the following peace treaty. The war was over, but there was still problems to be had. You see, the way the war ends, it's not like it's just flipping a switch. A lot of those people are going to come home and remember what it was, especially on the losing side. It's better to think of the war as hitting a pause button than just being done. But with that being said, today we took a look at how the United States was involved and affected by World War I. Hope you learned something. I'll see you next time.